Hey, we're recording. Okay. So thank you for coming to join me for this next round worth of weirdness. And do shrimp and sauces. The idea was to try and take a couple things, not necessarily just straight pantry items, but a couple things that seem, fairly um, versatile as far as ingredients go, and be able to try and create a couple of different things. Some of it's going to be a little fast, some of it's going to be a little slower, but ideally it's all in the same sort of realm of ingredient things. Um, so we were going to walk through shrimp, try and hit it three different ways. One to be a little bit more spicy, scampi style, which is pretty much just butter, garlic, and some kind of chili, and a little bit of seasoning, and just trying to find that right balance. Then we're going to do what I usually marinate my shrimp in when I grill it. Very basic, salt, pepper, balsamic vinegar, oil, garlic, not too crazy with it. And then, taking that same basic marinade and turning it into something a little Asian by adding some tamari, some soy sauce, adding a little bit of like sriracha, adding some fish sauce to the shrimp, which I know doesn't seem like it makes a whole lot of sense, but it helps to just kind of augment that umami flavor that you're looking for, and helps to give it a little bit more, not meaty, but a little bit more robust of a flavor profile coming off of the grill for those kind of things, or even when you stir fry it, just to make sure that the shrimp still kind of maintain some kind of element of excitement there. For sauces, I was looking at four. The first one's going to be, well, actually, I'm going to do them in a weird order, just to be able to try and make sure this doesn't take 12 hours. But the ones we're going to do is a pesto, a pomodoro, bolognese sort of a rip-off sauce, and then an alfredo. The bolo and the pomodoro are, both going to be our tomato-based sauces. One is a little bit more light, summery, really does well in the height of, like tomato season, or with really great canned tomatoes. The bolognese is a little bit more richer, decadent, slow simmering. It takes a little bit more time, a little complexity in there. But the one we're making is vegetarian. You don't have to if you don't like it, or if you're into the meat thing. And we'll have that step kind of when we add all the vegetables and start cook all that in there. But with the vegetarian version, I use mushrooms, and like even for people who don't tend to like mushrooms, we're going to chop it up really fine in the food processor, because it's there to add bulk and like not the same kind of like spongy texture a lot of people have an issue with the mushrooms, but something a little bit more chewy, with a little bit more sustenance after it's sort of been sauteed and then braised in the red wine, and then sort of reduced back down again. It has time to simmer and sort of collect its thoughts and be with everybody else. So that one's a little bit more rich and decadent. And then of course the Alfredo, you can kind of dial it up, dial it down however you want. But the idea with that one, it's going to be our creamy sauce, a little bit more Parmesan in it, just to be able to kind of give it something a little bit more richness and lusciousness. It's easy to overdo it with it. I find myself doing that quite often, make it just too rich, and you can only survive with like 2 or 3 tablespoons worth. So we're going to try and find a happy medium and see if I can't find a nice, flavorful sauce that will coat and kind of get all those notes that we want to, without making you feel like you just drank a half gallon of heavy cream. Because I know that's not, that doesn't lead for healthy living. So with this, to get it started, I've got my pot of water. I'm going to go ahead and for the pasta, I'm just going to use a spaghetti, just dried and easy. Making fresh pasta is great. It's fun. It's really fast. I think once you understand the principles of it, but it does require a little bit more specialty equipment with the pasta roller. So I wanted to wait on that one until maybe a little bit further down the road. So I'm just using a store-bought dried pasta to make life easy. But with the water through, got my biggest pot that I have. I'm going to go and fill it up with warm water out of the tap, just trying to get it as close to hot as I can get started with it. I know there's lots of things about don't salt the water, do salt the water, oil the water, don't oil the water. For me, I salt it, but I don't oil it. And the reason for that is that there's a lot of times, like even with the Pomodoro or with the Bolognese, I'm going to go through and try and like save some of my my cooking liquid from the pasta, because that starchy water with that extra salt there helps to give me a little bit of sort of dilution on the sauce, so it's not quite so thick or heady with all that tomato in it. But it doesn't dilute out the flavor because it's already seasoned. And that starchiness helps to kind of keep it, so that way I don't like water it down. We're just helping to sort of stretch it out a little bit and give it some room to breathe. You know, almost similar to like a whiskey or something else where you add a little bit of water to kind of help you taste it better, at least in my opinion. So we got the water going. Next big thing we're going to start off with is bolognese, because that's going to take a little bit of time to get going. It's going to start off with our mirepoix, which from before is sort of that mixture of onion, carrot, and celery. So I'm going to start off with my onion. You see I kind of topped off the bottom of the, lopped off the bottom of the top, and then just straight split it in half. So that way I can kind of come at where my little paper layers are. Pull all those babies back and out of the way. So that way I don't have to worry about trying to peel it whole, because I'm going to cut it up anyway. So it makes my life a little easier. Then I can pick up all these little pieces of paper and get them off of the board, so that way they don't end up in my mix. For this, I'm going to try and kind of dovetail my mise en place a little bit. For those that don't speak culinary French, mise en place is a French culinary term for everything in its place. And the idea is, like, when you watch a cooking show, when they have everything in little containers and everything's all measured out, dialed out, so they just have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's kind of mise en place. That's the idea of having everything where you need it, right when you need it, so you don't have to really think about it. I appreciate the idea, and I think that it's really important for a lot of things, but it's, for me in cooking, I don't get everything ready and then start making it. I kind of make it as I go. Practice, time, multiple mess ups on my part for sure, between missed timings and not paying attention to what I'm doing, or being distracted, not finishing before I need the next step. I've run through enough times of like making mistakes on my own that I still continue to do it because I'm good enough at it that it works out. But if it's something that stresses you out, or if you're still trying to like learn a recipe, it's always good to kind of get your things together as much as you can, and then work your way through. So for this particular piece, I've got my one onion. Some of it goes in the Pomodoro. Some of it's going to go into the bolo. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and I'm going to dice out my little bit of onion that I want for the Pomodoro right now, and then I'm going to set it aside. And then the rest of what I've got going on is going to end up going into the bolognese. So that way I don't have to grab another onion. If I'm going to be here playing around with them, I might as well do it now. And I realized I just did that without saying anything about it. But with the onion, and we talked about this last time, but kind of following those natural curves of the onion, I'm just going to go and use my knife to come in at the angle and sort of move to that center point of my onion. So that way, as I come to dice my onion, I can go through and let the onion do a lot of the work for me, by keeping my fingers out of the way. And now I've got, sort of these, almost see as I squeeze it a little bit, like there's just all these beautiful pieces of dice just about ready to rumble already. Now that I'm not doing kind of sliced it along because of the thinness of the onion and the way that those rings work. So as I come to cutting it, you can see it just comes away in a nice, really beautiful small dice. And all I had to do was, the side cuts down the way that the onion runs, along with the grain of it, and then coming back across it. And then, none of the old school way I was originally taught, which was, kind of coming in from the side, dropping down from the top, and then coming across over here. And next thing you know, you've got this like big, weird, squidgy sort of onion thing that doesn't quite want to come together the way that you need it to, and it's a pain, and it's really dangerous on your fingers. Nice, fast, easy, and not a whole lot to have to fuss with there. So I'm going to take these onions, I'm going to set them aside for the Pomodoro, because we're going to come back around to that a little later. But now I've got those done and ready to go. I'm going to take the rest of my onion, and since I'm going to throw it in the food processor, I'm not really going to worry too much about the rest of this cut, because I just want it to be nice and small. If you don't have a food processor, go ahead and cut it as small as you can. That will help to just kind of disperse out the flavor a little bit faster, get everything where you want it to be. If you like your bolo chunky, you want to have a little bit more of that, sort of big, hearty, sort of tomato style pasta stew. By all means, leave it whatever size you like. Now we're gonna grab a couple pieces of celery. With these things, same thing, because it's going in the food processor here with us. I'm just gonna go and kind of cut it into, about an inch, a little more or so worth of chunks. I don't want the food processor to have to work too hard, but I'm also trying to get this started so that way it has time to cook and do what it needs to do. And then my carrot. So for this, I am going to go ahead and peel it just to make sure that I don't have any of this earthy bits with these, these sort of table carrots that a lot of like these deeper cracks are sometimes hard to like kind of scrub out across the board. So whatever peeler you have with it, if you haven't seen these or haven't used these Y-shaped peelers that come from all over the place, they're relatively inexpensive. I think anywhere that you go, if you spend more than like $2 on one, you got ripped off. But they're really fast and easy. You just have to get used to the idea. Like I put my thumb and my forefinger together, like right in the hole, and then use my middle finger to sort of keep it angled correctly. See, I'm gonna get my hand to do this. The idea is sort of a pull away motion. Let's do this one. So now that I've got my carrot up, I'm gonna go through and just kind of pull it down the length. And then I get that nice, long, beautiful peel that falls off. If you get used to it or you end up peeling a lot of carrots, you kind of learn to, it's gonna be hard with this angle. You just kind of learn to leave your peel side just a little off and let gravity do the work. So that way that peel just falls right out of your way. Things that you wouldn't think about if you peeled, 1 or 2 carrots a month. But when you peel, 1 or 2 50-pound bags of carrots in a day, you just start trying to find things that make life a little easier. Yeah.
How much onion are we saving and how much celery?
So I took that 1 onion and I took a little more than a quarter of it for the Pomodoro. And then we did 3 stalks worth of celery. The ratio can be whatever you want. If you want a little bit more oniony, I'm gonna do probably a little bit of extra garlic in this one, so I don't want it to be too pungent. Thinking about the elements of what goes into a mirepoix, you're looking at some of those base pieces of taste in itself. Your celery is going to provide some bitterness, just as it starts to reduce down. Your carrot is going to add some sweetness, and the onion is going to add some pungency. So depending on where your flavor profile fits on that wheel, you want to go through and adjust. If you like it super sweet, add more carrots. If you don't like it as much sweet, you can drop the carrots back. Just kind of playing with it. And these are all base elements that'll be a little bit harder to discern, when you make one batch every couple of months. But kind of knowing where your flavor, taste roll and kind of understanding those base fundamentals of what contributes to the flavor of a dish will allow you a little bit more flexibility in kind of figuring out how you want to adjust it the next time around, and how to make it better and make it more your recipe.
Do you know what order you're going to be cooking everything in?
Well, we're going to start the bolo, and then we're going to go through and probably knock out the pesto while we wait for that, because then that dovetails all the work into the Pomodoro, and then we'll finish off with the alfredo. And somewhere in there, we're going to cook pasta. What's that?
And shrimp at the end?
Yeah. Just because I've got the 2 burners and trying to like manage all the pieces. Okay, so with the carrot, now that we've got it peeled, this one I'm going to go a little bit smaller on my cuts. We talked about it before, but with the cut piece, I'm kind of using my French knife by taking the tip and putting it down onto the board. You can see I'm still kind of in the carrot, and then just kind of using that rock of the angle of the blade to go through and cause a nice little levering action here. It allows me to go through and cut that carrot pretty consistently. What's that?
Can you move this shrimp? Thank you.
When I get to this fat end of the carrot here, I'm just going to take it and split it in half just so that way it doesn't keep rolling on me. And plus I can continue to get a nicer, smaller size piece. Working this through, and we're going to throw these carrots in here into my food processor. Okay. Pesky dog. All right, then I'm gonna grab my mushrooms real fast. So I've got portobello mushrooms that I'm gonna go through and use. Big, beautiful, meaty, easier to work with. One thing, you've got your stem and you've got all these gills on the inside. I don't necessarily mind the stem piece, so I'm going to keep that. But there are some pieces of this that, like the gills underneath, hold a lot of the spores. So anytime you add, mushrooms, portobello mushrooms with all these gills in there, you're going to end up with a little bit more of a darker shade of product than you would want, or then potentially than you can want. So it's just for an aesthetic piece, trying to get them cleaned out. With these, as with all mushrooms, we're going to give them a quick rinse because they are grown in dirt, even if it's sterilized dirt. But just a quick flush across the top, kind of feeling it, seeing if there's anything gritty, any sort of raised areas that need to get washed off. They don't need to go on like full, read a book bath time, but just a quick spritz there, get off most of the fuzz, you'd be good to go.
There are 3 active screens. If you only have 1 or 2 up, you might want to add them. You can pin them if you are not used to using Zoom, or just text me if you need help.
With the gills, what I'm gonna do is just grab a teaspoon, and I'm gonna go through a container here, and you can just kind of use a spoon or even the back of the spoon, and kind of work your way back and forth on the mushroom, trying to scrape out that part, or those leafy parts of the gill here. It doesn't need to be 100% perfect. It's going to be a little damp down. We're just trying to get some of it cleared off, so that way it doesn't go through and take everything and turn it super dark. And again, mostly this is just for aesthetics. There's no real, culinary reason to do it. Just kind of what I learned, so that's how I roll. But just real fast. I'm not trying to scrape too heavy into the meat or trim pieces off. Just trying to get most of that like loose, flappy part of the mushroom gone. Get that out of the way. Clean up my space a little bit again. One thing to think about when you wipe knives, I know I do it fairly often. One thing that I'm always being aware of is where my edge is, even with a towel in my hand, because a good sharp knife is going to go through and cut through a towel, and then it'll quickly go into your hand. So always remember, even when wiping, kind of wipe away from yourself, hold the knife static in a good grip, and then just make sure that you're wiping basically the spine of the knife toward the edge, as opposed to trying to wipe the blade side and or toward yourself. Okay, so I see the water's boiling behind me, so we're gonna hustle this up a bit here. So I'm gonna take these stem pieces and just quarter them real fast. Again, that food processor is gonna make quick work of all this. If you're doing it by hand, by all means, cut them up into something bite size. I would say the same sort of rule applies as what we did with the soup. You want it to, in theory, fit kind of on a spoon, so that way it doesn't get too far out of whack with what you're trying to serve it with. You can do your pasta sauces with a ton of different pastas, depending on whatever sort of way you go. I think the general rule ends up being, you want it to be a little thicker and chunkier whenever you've got ridges and cups. So shells, orchette, things like that. So that's where you've got like little scoopers that help to kind of pick up those pieces, and it all kind of melds together. Thinner sauces tend to do better with like a fettuccine or spaghetti. I think when you look at these sauces in particular, you'll see fettuccine Alfredo. You'll see a Pomodoro with angel hair pasta. Just because the thinness of those particular sauces will sort of help to coat those big long noodles, and that way you can kind of get the right sort of sauce to guts ratio in the bites that you're having there. All right, so with this, I'm going to go through and I'm going to turn on my bolo pot. our pan. I use this nice big fat wide bottom pan. It's got these nice raised sort of sides to it. It's fancy. I picked it up as a hand-me-down from one of the restaurants, but any sort of wider shallow pan will work. What I want to try and do is create as much surface area as I can to help with the reduction. Give everything time to like sort of cook down. I don't want to wait all day for this to sort of reduce. So the more surface area I have, the faster I can make that happen and kind of get it onto the flavor-inducing simmering that I want. For my temperature, I'm going to go probably right around medium. So my stove goes to 10. So I'm going to drop it at a 5. Actually, we'll go 5.5. So I'm going to let that go to 5.5 for now. I got my vegetables in the food processor. I'm going to pulse it up a bit. Get this mixed real fast. I'll bring it over and show you. The idea is not to turn it into a full puree, but I do want everything to have seen seen one of these blades on the inside of the machine at least once, if not more, like 5 times. Just so that way I get a really good sort of texture against this, and knowing that like I'm going to get some reduction in size, difference in texture once we've gone through and cooked it a bit. Really what I'm looking for is this nice sort of mealy texture. Everything has been cut at least once, a couple times. Everything is sort of really nicely blended together. This is going to release some moisture into it as we've gone through and sort of broken down the cell walls of the onions with the carrots and the rest of it. So now that that's pulsed, we're going to let the pan behind us warm up just a touch. We got that water boiling, so I'm going to grab some dried pasta. So dried pasta. What's that? Yeah, Costco, nice and easy. The directions, cooking directions on here somewhere. Probably say somewhere around like 12 to 15 minutes. Oh, boiling water for 11 minutes. So we can start that. We can set the timer. I mentioned this before. Doing this as long as I have, I've got a lot of like really great internal timers that just help me to remember. But I would definitely suggest if it's not your thing, or if it's time management or remembering those kinds of things is a struggle, set a timer. They're usually right there on the stove or on the microwave. Ideally, it'll help out a lot. And just getting you close to where you want to be when you start off with it. Anytime I go with the timer for something, I almost always set it for like 2 minutes short of whatever the recommended is, because then I can start to understand when that line is from, like not quite done to done. And then every now and again, I end up pushing it past and I get into overdone. But at least, the more times I expose myself to that, the more times I was kind of a willing participant in the experiment, the better it seemed to get for me. And the sooner I could start to kind of understand where that line was and be able to manage it a little bit better. So with the pasta, I dropped it in, kind of scattered it a little bit. I'm letting the heat of the water go through and kind of drop everything down for right now. But I do have sort of the ubiquitous pasta scooper. So I like this because it's got those tines, which allow me to kind of gently start to kind of move the pasta around, make sure that those big chunks that went in on the bottom get a chance to separate out a little bit. And I'm even now, I know that like intellectually we just put the pasta in. There's no way that it's done, but you can also feel it in the spoon. Like I can feel that this is still really crispy. It's giving me a lot of resistance as I push it around. So I know that this isn't quite there yet. And then as we get closer to it being done correctly, the texture is going to change. It's going to feel different even through the spoon, which will give us a good indicator on when to start testing. Okay, so this bad boy starting to get to that point. I take a little bit of our extra virgin olive oil, give it a Let's see, that's probably, I don't know, 2 tablespoons. For those of you who are doing a vegetarian, this is where most of the lusciousness of this dish is going to come through. If you are doing the meat piece for the bolognese, you're going to get some cast off of that extra fat from your proteins. So you can probably use a little less oil just to make sure that it doesn't get too greasy by the time you're all done. So my goal is typically to kind of be able to coat the entire bottom of the pan with a little bit of excess that can kind of float around the edges. And that's what I did just now, is just kind of, allowing it to cascade from one side to the other. Give me a chance to keep an eye on my pasta so it didn't boil over. With the boiling over the pasta, I'm actually going to turn it down off a high and take it from a 10 to about an 8.5. Just so that way I can give myself a little bit of time before it tries to bubble up over everything again. But with this oil, the other thing that I'm looking for is, like, by spreading it out like this and giving it a chance to heat, I can smell it. There's that, I guess, utilizing all your senses before. I think we talked about, like, listening to the way that it sounds when it's cooking. That smell, of course, is a very important piece, but even the pre-adding all the rest of it, warm oil to me smells differently. And when you go through and, like, don't put your face over hot pans. Kind of use a wafting technique just to be able to keep yourself a little bit safer. You never know when you're, like, going to stick your face in something sizzling and it's going to pop in your eye. If you start, like, reducing vinegar, or when you first add wine or something like that, steam coming out of the oven, like, always protect your face, keep it back. So that way you don't end up with any unseemly injuries or issues while you're trying to cook. So this smells warm, feels warm. I'm gonna take my veggies, throw these in here. And again, the second I get in here, I can hear and see that sizzling. I want to get that instant sort of heat impact against these vegetables here. So that way they start to release their water, so I can get it reduced down. And get these to the flavor profile that I want. I want to concentrate the moisture in those mushrooms. I want to concentrate out the water of those onions and give them that potency and space to be with everything else. I haven't added any garlic yet on purpose because with this long sort of simmer time in the beginning here, I want to try and make sure that I don't scorch it. So this gives me a good opportunity to kind of control the action and let that ride for a little bit without having to worry about it so much. We're going to add the garlic probably a minute to 2 minutes before we go through and add in the wine, because I just need that garlic to release a little bit and take the edge off of some of that astringency that it has. And then we're going to want to deglaze it and cool down that pan really quick to be able to make sure that we don't end up with those bitter burnt garlic pieces.
So in the processor was just onion, carrot, mushrooms.
Onion, carrot, mushroom, celery.
Celery. Any spices?
Nothing so far. And with this, typically, I'm going to try and stay focused down to the salt and pepper, and then the herbs that we picked. Between the basil, the parsley, the fresh thyme, the oregano, these things will go through and hopefully help us lift the flavor profile up of these things. And so that's where those seasonings are going to come in, but they will be toward the end because your fresh herbs are going to have a little less impact than your dried ones will, but they're also less likely to sit and go bitter from having spent too much time in the heat and the moisture. Okay, so we got that rolling. What we're going to do now is we're going to try and start getting ourselves ready for that Pomodoro. And get ourselves set up for this next stage in the bolo. So I'm going to take my garlic pieces. Garlic pieces. You can go through and get fresh garlic. Pop them on your own if you like. The basic principle is just the same. For however it's been for years now. You kind of pop off your clove. You kind of squish it a little bit just to be able to get that paper to crack. So you can get finger in there. There you go. And then you can kind of, depending on how dry your paper is, how fresh that garlic is, you can go through and kind of roll it a little bit and get that off of there. But me knowing how much I don't like doing that, I end up, having a couple of cloves of fresh garlic around, just in case I absolutely need them. But for the most part, I tend to buy peeled garlic. Pretty easy to get. I try to stay away from those like pre-processed, pre-chopped stuff because the whole stuff lasts long, and long enough usually for me to be able to utilize it. And then mincing it's not a pain, so I don't really have to worry about chopping it. We talked about this one last time, but we're gonna do it again. Get a little closer here. So with this, instead of using the blade piece of the knife to cut this garlic, I'm going to use the spine instead. And you can see that there's a really significant sort of thickness difference between the blade versus that spine. And what this is going to do is going to help me go through and kind of mince out this garlic in one pass, 2 passes really, instead of having to go through and like go over it 15 times. So I'm going to start, same thing as before, keep my fingers out of the way and utilizing the knife the same way I would normally in that sort of down motion, but using the spine piece of the knife. I go through one time and I've got, a relatively well-ridged sort of piece. If I swing it around this other direction and kind of come at it one more time. And with this, I'm sort of smashing down and pushing away just to be able to help kind of separate the rest of those fibers. And now I've got, a beautifully minced, easy to disperse through my dish piece of garlic in a relatively, short and painless time frame. So when I'm only doing a couple pieces, a couple, meaning dozen or whatever, I'll go through and do it this way. If you're doing a lot, if you want to kind of process your own fresh garlic, you're making a big Italian grandmother sized pot of tomato sauce or something like that, by all means, heat up a little bit of oil, food processor, immersion blender, whatever it is that kind of gets you where you want to go. I think there's a lot to be said for understanding and appreciating. Ooh, that's a big one. All right, so for this big blade, I'm going to cut it in half here, just to make it a little bit more. There we go, manageable. There's a lot to be said for the idea of where cooking was, 50 years ago, heck, even 15 years ago, and this idea of being able to slave away in a kitchen for hours or days to be able to make a dish. But I think for me, there's just other things I want to be doing out there in the world, and more things I want to be making more often. So trying to find those ways that help me to get a great product at home a little faster, so that way I can get to eating it and or sharing it with other people. All right, so that's the garlic. Let's set that aside. We're going to check on the pasta here in a hot second. Okay. Now with the pasta, you almost see a definite difference. I don't know if they'll see how much that's going to be visible, but it's a lot more limp. It's a lot more pliable. They're sort of sliding through the water like little snakes or eels, as opposed to the sort of weird, wet, flappy things they were before. So you can see it just kind of dangles like a piece of wet noodle. For me, there's part of it is the feel, part of it's the mouth texture. So it's gonna be hard to. That camera's not gonna do it. If this one will. Nope. So I apologize. I don't have the high def cameras available for it, but if you take a piece of pasta that's not quite there yet, and you kind of gotten to this stage, you take a bite out of it, there's going to be a core, like that white core of uncooked, still dry pasta. And we don't want to get rid of it entirely. And this is kind of what the Italians refer to as al dente, where it's got a little bit of bite left to it. We don't want to cook it into mush. I want it to be able to stand up against everything else that we've got going to it, but it needs to be its own thing. And with that salt in the water, it has a little bit of seasoning to it already. So it's not like I'm putting in some sort of like dry, bland, starchy component into my mouth as I'm rolling through this. It already has, some of that starchiness in the water that it was cooked in, plus the salt. So it already has a distinct, at least to me, a distinct pasta-y flavor. Okay. I think that's good. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pull this off real fast. And we're gonna get it drained. Always be careful to steam, especially if you're pouring into a sink. At this point, you have a couple options. You can set it aside just to kind of finish off your sauce that you're gonna make in there. Or you can cool it by running a little bit of cold water under there or on it and start to kind of like stop the cooking process. If you want to hold on to the pasta for a little while, maybe save it for the next day. You made enough for, dinner and then lunch. I would definitely suggest, kind of cooling it by running it under cold tap water to help finish off or stop the cooking process. But then you want to go through and add a little bit of oil. In theory, something neutral, unless you're going to do savory, you can always add a little bit more of that garlic oil to it, just to kind of help keep the noodles a little pliable. By the time you get to it the next day, the oil will be absorbed into the pasta. So you might have to do it again, or maybe hit a little cold water when you refresh it. But it just helps everything to keep from becoming kind of a big gooey mess as those starches kind of congeal on the outside of the pasta. And for me, since we don't have a sauce ready for this yet, I'm going to go ahead and run it under that cold water just until I can kind of stick my hands in it and not be burnt. I just want to start to kind of pull it off of that knife's edge of high temp cooking process and then bring it into something a little cooler, room temperature. Still going to leave it in the colander for right now. Now that it's kind of rinsed, I drizzle a touch of oil over the top and give it one last little toss. And then we're going to set it there and leave it for now when we finish off the rest of this meal. Okay. Now we're going to pull double duty. So now I've got the pot that I cooked the pasta in. I'm going to turn it back on. I'm going to go 4 out of 10. We're going to let that start off just on its own, and it's going to kind of just evaporate that residual water in there from the pasta. I'm giving this, the bolo a little bit of a, stir every now and again, just trying to make sure that I consistently kind of keep those clumps down, move everything around a little bit. It's still, as we talked about before, I'm trying to get evaporation. So I want everything nice, spread out nice and wide, let that steam kind of come off. For the Pomodoro, we've got our onion, we've got our garlic. We're already most of the way there. For this one, then we're going to go through and we'll have our fresh herbs. We'll prop up next. We've got our extra virgin olive oil. So this one's almost ready to go, besides our tomato. And so for the tomato, I grabbed San Marzano style hunts. I've used, not fancy tomatoes before. I've used fresh tomatoes. Fresh tomatoes are great, but trying to take the time, find really great ones. Sometimes in the grocery store is a little bit challenging. Even with these, they came, in the grocery delivery today. You can see that there's very distinct color, and neither one of them is really the rich ruby red that we would want for tomatoes. There's only so much more ripening that's going to happen, especially on the counter. There are gases that help these kind of fruits ripen a little bit more. That's why they tell you like avocados and things can go into brown bags to help them ripen. But canned products tend to be picked at their height and then kind of preserved in a certain sense. They're not going to be as great as fresh, fresh Italian plum tomatoes picked off the vine in Tuscany. It's just not going to happen. And if you've got access to really great tomatoes and fresh produce, by all means, feel free to go through and do this, with whatever the best level of product is that you want to put into it. But I found that these work really great. Sorry, should have done the can opening before. These work really great. They've got a nice sort of a bigger chunk texture to them. So it's still a nice big plump tomato. They've taken the skin off of it as much as they can. There's going to be minimal amount of seeds to it. What I'm going to do is we're going to leave them in the can for right now. And when we get to adding them to the pan, we're going to basically grab them out of the can and then smash them. So I just want like a nice hand crushed kind of tomato process into that Pomodoro. For the bolo, it'll be the same thing. It'll be a little bit more, I might be a little more aggressive with the bolo, just because I want those pieces to kind of help meld into what we've already got going on with our pureed vegetables. This pot should be close to warm already because it just had that hot pasta in it. So we're going to add a little bit of our oil. I'm going to throw in those onions. Got that nice, good sizzle right off the bat, so we know we're cooking. I want to move them around, trying to keep it from burning. I'm not really trying to get any color on these, just trying to take the edge off of that zestiness of the onion. We're not going to be able to, with just the onion and the oil in here, we're not really going to be able to take the time to do translucent. If you want to, and you want to help develop a little bit, this deeper onion flavor to it, by all means, you can come at it a little slower, like a 2 or a 3 off of your stove, and like let it get a nice slow roll. But knowing that I'm trying to get some of this accomplished here in a certain time frame, I wanted to come at it a little bit faster. As you can see, I think I'm starting to get a little bit of color. Okay, I'm starting to get a little bit of color in the bottom of the pan. Just trying to keep everything moving around. That aggressive sizzle has stopped, or at least lessened. So I know that I'm starting to kind of bring out some of those waters and moistures. Moving this around has been able to help keep me from having any of it burn. Okay, so now I'm going to take some of our garlic. I am going to say that against the quarter onion that we did, I'm going to take about 2 cloves worth of garlic. We're going to throw that in there. That smell of fresh garlic when it hits hot oil. And those sauteed onions. Ooh-wee. Moving this around. The garlic's going to stick a little bit on the bottom. Not too worried about it, but it definitely does start my timer on when I need to sort of get these tomatoes in here and get this deglazed before it goes too sideways, which is right about now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my hand, kind of curl it up over the tomatoes and get the liquid in there. Careful of the steam. Get your hands out of the way if you can. And then now I'm going to grab out the tomatoes and just sort of roll and squish them. In my hand over the pot, just trying to get some of this all broken up. Some of these tomatoes, because they're still whole, will squirt when you're going through and squeezing them out. So just be careful, be forewarned about that. Try and protect yourself and your clothes. Get out the rest of that liquid. Kind of get it down to a nice sort of low simmer. Just sort of simmering around the edges here. Getting those tomatoes rocking. You can go coarse, you can go fine. If you're doing it with fresh tomatoes, however big you want it to be. Now that I've got everything out of the can, Give it a can, just a quick rinse with some cold water. I'm not trying to add a whole lot. I want that tomato flavor to be really prevalent in here. Just using it to get those lights out of there. Give the hand a quick rinse. Okay, we're gonna come back to the bolo. Get that moving. Now I'm starting to get some sticky spots that need a little bit more love with the spatula when I come across. So now that I've got those, spread everything out real fast. I'm gonna take that wine that I would like. Got a bottle going. And I think I mentioned it in the chat, but you know, with the wine, yeah. Extra like liquid still left in it. So Teresa, did you just have like some extra liquid still in the bottom of the pan? Like it hadn't dried out and reduced out as much? Oh, in the can. Everything in the can goes in the soup or in the Pomodoro. So with the wine, one of the things we mentioned, I'm gonna turn down this Pomodoro. I don't want it to go too fast. So now I'm gonna take it down from a 4 down to about a 3. And just give it a little stir. I just want those onions to kind of cook a little bit. I want the garlic and the onions and tomatoes get to know each other. So we're just gonna slow roll that one for a hot minute. With the bolo, with the wine, yeah, try to find something that that you're willing to drink. It shouldn't just be swill, but it definitely does not need to be your best bottle. Usually, you know, for us, we don't drink a whole lot of wine. You know, so I end up kind of cracking a bottle, using some for food, and then the rest of it becomes drink with dinner. You know, depending on how it goes, or you have some drink and I've got like a half a bottle left over, and that has to become food. But I just want to throw that in there. We're gonna let that reduce out to dry again. We're gonna make a lot of noise with these can openers and get the tomatoes ready for the bolo. Yes. So that was about a quarter bottle left for what we did. So it'd be about a half cup, 3/4 of a cup. Red or white, it doesn't particularly matter. What you're trying to do is reduce it down and get some of those tanniny elements. I would say it will impact the end flavor. Like if you use like a really bright, summery green grass kind of Chardonnay, it's definitely going to be very different than if you used a big, you know, round, full flavored Merlot. So again, you know, just kind of knowing what you like and what you have around, you know, it's going to help kind of decide how you want it to turn out. Okay. So now with the bolo, we're just kind of waiting for that wine to reduce out. Again, like I said, part of my intent in using this pan was to be able to have this happen pretty fast. If it takes a little while longer, don't sweat it, you know, keep rolling. If you're, you know, still have a little bit of liquid in here, you just want to kind of keep up. It's not going to be the end of the world. If there's a little bit of residual moisture left in the bottom, we're just cooking here. At the end, we're going to end up with a meal and it's going to be great, and no harm in that. So one thing before I forget, because I'm going to forget, I was going to put the garlic in my bolo. We should have done that before I threw in the wine, but this is what happens when I fly by the seat of my pants. I apologize. So I'm gonna throw that garlic in there. We're gonna get a light simmer on it. Again, taking off some of that edge, that garlicky flavor. It is gonna sit and simmer in here for a while, so it's not like I'm too worried about, you know, having it end up with raw garlic flavor. But I'd still want to give it a little kickstart. Interesting fun fact about garlic is that in these little cells here, there are a lot of really great health properties. But in order to be able to unlock them, you need to know the key. I forget how they're pronounced because I'm not really good at chemistry. But there's 2 chemicals in here that live in separate parts of the cell. They both start with A. They have a ton of letters in them, and I forget how many, sort of syllables. But the end result is that when we go through and chop it up or mince up garlic, we allow those two chemicals to come together and they catalyze into a third chemical, which strangely enough also starts with an A, has a lot of syllables and vowels in it, and I can't pronounce it. But that chemical is the part that like gives garlic its healthy sort of properties. But if you add heat to it, or if you add acid to it within the first 15 minutes, it stops that process, and so you don't get as much sort of action out of it as you would want. So if you're really kind of trying to maximize your health benefits for it, chop up your garlic just as is, and then let it sit for about 15 minutes to let all those pieces mingle, and then you can go through and kind of heat it and acidify it and do anything else to it without really having to worry about any loss of those healthy properties. So now this is back to dry. We're gonna go through. Got our tomatoes here. Now I'm doing about 3 to 1, 3 cans worth of tomatoes in here versus the one I did against the Pomodoro. Part of that is because I'm a bigger fan of this sauce than the other one, personally. And then secondly, it's that the bigger sort of pot to try and get myself enough volume to let it sort of reduce down the way that I want and get where we need it to be texture-wise. But the same thing, I'm just going to sort of scoop the tomatoes out of here. Being careful with that cut edge. If you've got one of those can openers that still cuts edges. Getting these tomatoes out of here, giving them a little squish, moving them around. As you can see, I've had a couple of, I don't know if you can't see, but I've got a couple of squirters here. So just trying to, again, really control the way that I'm working them. So I've got my thumb and sort of like pushing my thumb into it to allow that wetness somewhere to go before I finish sort of smushing out the rest of it with my hand. It's like any sort of fluid dynamics will tell you if you go through and sort of squeeze something with nowhere to go, it's going to find its own little home. And Murphy's Law is going to tell you it's going to point right back at you when it squirts. So things to be aware of. It doesn't need to be, I'm not like trying to be super maniacal about it, making sure that they're perfect. I'm just really trying to get them separating out enough that I don't have to worry about those little poppers and squirters for the tomato later when I'm stirring this. But it's going to kind of cook down and mix well with the other pieces I got going on here. One thing, as you're looking at diced tomatoes or canned tomatoes overall, you might notice that some are exceptionally tougher than others when it comes to like the meat of the tomato. And these ones are breaking up really easy. I barely have to look at it strongly before it just starts to disintegrate. But I know other diced tomatoes that I've used in the past have been, kind of stand up to me like an angry preteen, telling me that they don't have to listen to what I tell them. And part of that is the calcium that canning processors will sometimes add to these products, because the calcium bonds with the pectin in the tomatoes and gives it more structure. So one of those things that you can look for on the back of the label to see if your cans of tomatoes have calcium in them. And if they do, you can have a pretty safe bet that they're going to be a little tougher and not necessarily break down quite as easily as some of the other ones will. All right, so the Pomodoro is just sort of sitting there simmering. Same thing now with the bolo. So I'm just going to go through kind of gently and carefully stir in all those ingredients that we seared, sauteed, and deglazed into this. And they're going to take a moment, get to know each other, maybe go on a date here soon as it starts to simmer, kind of create some beautiful flavor babies for us to enjoy later on. And even with like the oil, I'm sure you can't see it with the angle you have, but as you're doing your own, I'm sure you might be able to see kind of like that light oily sheen across the top of it, just because there's nothing really here that's going to absorb that. whether it's the extra virgin olive oil, whether it's kind of the extra fat from any proteins that you might have added to it. All that's going to slick on the top here, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. If it looks like the Exxon Valdez, probably want to try and get some of it off. But if it's just a faint shimmer, that'll be fine because it's going to add some lusciousness to the palate whenever we eat it. Otherwise, we're just going to end up with so those astringent elements, wine and the tomato, and there's not going to be any balance. So the fat here is helping to make sure that in the end, we're going to have a really nice, sort of well-rounded dish. Okay. So now with the Pomodoro, we're going to give it a little taste, see where we stand. At this point, we haven't seasoned anything, right? We just used our little pasta pot, onions, garlic, and tomato. Okay. Very bright, very tomatoey. Now is when I add some seasoning. So I'm going to take my salt and pepper mix. For me, salt and pepper mix is, what was this last one? This last one was like 5 to 1. So 5 parts salt to 1 part ground pepper. Whatever you like, you can have them separated. If you've got a pepper mill, by all means, feel free to use that as well. Actually, I should crack a little bit of that into the bolo while I got it in my hand anyway. The difference for me in using the mill here for the bolo versus using the fine ground for the Pomodoro is about time. I don't want the Pomodoro to sit on the stove anywhere near as long as I want for the bolo. So that finer sort of bit of pepper is going to help me get the dispersion I'm looking for in the flavor profile a little faster. Whereas this cracked black pepper takes a little bit longer. Sometimes it coats it out. And it's going to be a little bit bigger and more robust. So it'll hold up better against that. So all these are just sort of my, my tendencies and habits and the thought process behind it. By all means, do what you like, do what you have for, there's no reason to have, 3 different grinds of pepper. Unless that, is what you do. If that's what you do, then you do you. So now we've seasoned it a little bit. Just gonna give it a stir. I want to let it simmer a hint between each tasting for 2 things. One, I want to give it time to sort of dissolve and get that flavor profile hit. And secondly, I want my tongue to kind of get a second to relax and think about something else before I come back at it. There we go. So now with that, I've got the saltiness, which if you tried it straight with no salt and then added salt to it, hopefully you had the same experience I did, where now you can kind of pick out those bits of garlic, the bits of onion. Salt is really great at being able to provide a super beautiful base to lift up everything else around it. We used to do this experiment all the time where somebody would go through and kind of season a thing to whatever they thought their level was. And then I would taste it and then season it to what I thought my level was. And we would try the 2 side by side just to provide the contrast. And there's, when I was talking to the culinary students, there's a range for pretty much everything. I think, if you go through and think that, from here to here is good, or okay. And then from like here to here is good. Then you can go into here, which is great, but you have to know, where that line stops because great really goes into bad right after that. It doesn't just keep getting better. So trying to find that way out of, good, or pardon me, get out of good enough and into good, and then getting into greater, as you can. And some of that's going to be a little bit of, trial and error of adding a little bit more than you thought you would have last time, just to see how it behaves and what it does for you. Okay. So Pomodoro, I've got my sauce kicked out, seasoned it again. I added a little bit more salt and no more pepper in this round because I just wanted to ump that up a little bit. Perfect. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn it off. I'm gonna take it off the heat, kind of push it in the back here for a split second. Then we're gonna deal with our herbs. Then we're gonna go through and we'll add our herbs to it and let that set. And then that's gonna be pretty much good to go. With the herbs, there's a sort of basic trinity slash, quartet that tends to work pretty well in Italian food. And it's the ones that we kind of listed in the ingredients. We're talking about basil, parsley, thyme, and oregano. I think a lot of people have a bad idea of what parsley is. They're utilizing sort of the old school 80s, like big fat curly parsley, side plate, garnished. You get it with a scoop of cottage cheese and a slice of like weird melon. And you're right, that stuff is weird. Doesn't really have any texture. It's about the way that it looks on the plate, as opposed to what it does. But there's another type of parsley. So flat leaf parsley looks relatively similar to cilantro. If you're not paying like super close attention to it, but you can always kind of pull off a leaf and taste it and see kind of that difference in flavor profile between cilantro and parsley. And it has, for me, it tastes like bitter greens with a hint of sweetness, which I know sounds like a really really complicated sort of way to run through it, but it's not quite grassy, but it conjures to me like ideas of green and what fresh green tastes like. And then there's like this sweetness in the mid body, and then just a hint of bitterness as you start to chew it, kind of get it to the back of your throat. That helps to balance it out. And between that and the sort of soft, beautiful subtlety of the basil, you have fresh oregano that goes through, and as well has that sort of oregano at least has a little bit more of a, I don't know, oregano-y flavor. It's hard sometimes to explain the things to other people, but I always suggest, like pinch off a piece, try a little bit. I wouldn't necessarily do it in the grocery store as much anymore, given all the things in the world. But before that was a major concern. Like I'd pluck off a little piece of something, and try it as I was grocery shopping. Is it sweet? What does it taste like? How is this going to play against whatever food I have in my mind, for dinner, if that's the thing that I'm looking for, and just continuing to add to my my repertoire of flavors and known experiences. So with this, we're going to go through, and I've got some of the basil already sort of picked. I'm going to take the leaves. I've kind of got most of the stem pieces off of it. I'm going to try and lay them out a little flat, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to use these kind of like a cigar for those of you who are familiar with pot smoking paraphernalia elements. Basically going to use the basil sort of as my big fat cigar roll, and then I'm going to pack it with thyme and oregano, my smaller little herbs here, and then roll the whole thing and then chop it, so that way it makes it a little easier for me to manage as I go through. So I'm just kind of picking the leaves off the stem. It doesn't need to be 100% perfect. I just don't like the stems. It's not that they're inedible, but not the flavor I'm looking for. So I just want to concentrate on these little bitty leaves and pick them off. Sometimes if they're super fine like that, for me, if I'm entertaining, I'll totally go through and pick it off, just because trying to impress. If I'm at home and it's just Aaron and I'll probably leave a couple extras in there, because I'm trying to get back to the couch and hanging out and or doing whatever else. So I've got about 10 basil leaves, a couple sprigs worth of oregano stripped off here. I'm gonna grab, for the Pomodoro, I'm not gonna add thyme. I'm gonna wait for that on the Alfredo. But I'm gonna grab some of this parsley. With the parsley, you can strip it with a fork, because it has that sort of cilantro-y-ness to it. You can also just just grab, put my fingers in a nice light 3-finger grip here, and then just sort of pull it away. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. If that's the case, then I just kind of grab it again. The stems are completely edible. They'll completely break down, do what I need them to do. So it's just about, kind of how detailed you want to be with it. Now, these fresh herbs are really what's going to help this Pomodoro kind of stand out with those tomatoes and make this more than just, you know, canned tomatoes with our onions and garlic in it. So I want to try and make sure I've got a good amount here with some of that balance to it. It's not equal parts, but I'd want to say that if we were looking at ratios, I'd probably do about like, I don't know, 1 part basil, probably like 1 part parsley, and then we're looking at like maybe 1/4 or 1/3 part oregano. But you know, depending on what you like, where your flavor profile sits, you can of course adjust that to whatever else you would like. If you want one of more than the other, or if you just don't have any of one piece, by all means. We're just trying to get a little fresh greenery in here to help lift that sauce up a bit. Okay, so I've got everything kind of tucked in there, as you know, as well as need be. And then I'm going to go through and kind of press down on all the loose stuff in the middle, and then use my thumb to kind of grab that last edge of the basil leaf that I had laid out and stacked. And then we're just going to keep kind of rolling those bad boys over as I get my little baby leaves kind of floating around here. Just kind of keep trying to tuck them in. Not really trying to smush it down, just trying to keep it, you know, tight enough that it's not going to explode. Then I'm going to take our knife. Now, remembering to keep my fingers curled back or my tips tucked under so that way I don't lose them. I'm going to go through and just use the knife, and this is called a chiffonade, very thin sort of ribbons. With this one, I've got a lot more sort of motion with the knife. I want to try and not smash everything down. Because smashing it down is just going to make all those oils come out of the basil a lot faster. It's going to make it turn black. With this, I'm almost kind of not chopping as much as I'm trying to like gently saw it a little bit in order to be able to go through and kind of keep it from getting smooshed down on the bottom and just get, you know, some kind of like light ribbony element to the herbs. You can, you know, go a little smaller, a little finer if you like to, if you're more comfortable with it. You can even go through and just take these herbs and like straight tear them up and throw them in there. I just like the sort of dispersion that I get with the herbs when I chop them. And, you know, kind of see it's a nice sort of like big shaggy pile of herbs here. Smells great. Hopefully yours does as well. I'm going to go over it one more time with my knife. When I do this, I'm going to take and make sure all 4 of my fingers are up on the top here. I've got my thumb way up out of the way. I've got a good solid grip on my handle, and then I'm going to use that that part of the edge here to just kind of create that rocking motion. But this time the knife does not leave the board, so that way I can keep my digits safe and make sure I still have fingers by the time this is done. And I'm going to start kind of going away from me, but you know, kind of get that sort of chopping motion. Come over my shaggy pile here. You know, kind of I dive forward and then kind of rock a couple steps back. Dive forward, rock a couple steps back. Kind of like use my knife again, making sure all 4 of my fingers are on top of that blade, keeping them safe and out of the way. And you know, kind of reposition. And we're gonna go back through one more quick time to get it to about where I want it, which should be right about there. So none of those, not as many of those like big fat strands. Now everything's kind of like nice or light chop. But I've got a good sized pile of it. Smells great. And I'm going to take my Pomodoro and we're just going to add all this in here. With this, I kind of, I do this a lot. I use my knife kind of as my movement tool. One of the things to think about with this though is that you are pushing the blade of your knife toward the palm of your hand. So kind of make sure that you're always at a really good angle to keep you from potentially like kind of accidentally pumping into your fist. And then just kind of making sure that as soon as I know where that knife blade is, you know, kind of keeping control of it to keep myself safe, or as safe as I possibly can with a maneuver that potentially dangerous. All right, so we threw all those herbs in there. We're gonna give it a little stir. I'm gonna turn down this bolo now. It's simmering pretty heavily. We're gonna drop it down to just below a 2. So my oven or stove does once it gets below 2, it starts doing points. So I'm at a 1.8 out of 10. Everything was nice and aggressive. I didn't really call it out, but there's definitely an increase in sort of thickness already with what we've got going on. So some of the tomato solids have started to break down. When I'm using my spatula here, I'm actually going through and still kind of finding any big chunks and pushing them down to the bottom of the pan. Not like super aggressively, but just as I stir, it's kind of a subconscious motion. Just to help continue to sort of break down those bigger pieces that I see. Because I do have a couple floaties here that are going to be a little larger than I want in that finished product. So I'm just working on them a little bit. They'll continue to break down the heat, the time will make them easier and softer. So I don't have to be super crazy about it right now, but just remembering to kind of do it as I'm in here. So that way I don't have quite as much crazy going on later. And so the Pomodoro's got all those nice, beautiful, fresh herbs in there. And give it one more sort of nice, gentle sort of throw around. And then we'll give her a taste. And with this taste, I'm trying to get, a little bit of herb, a little bit of the sauce. If I can find a little floaty piece of onion, I'll check that one out as well. Shouldn't be too hot now that it's kind of sat for a minute, but protect your tongue. There we go. Tomatoey background, garlic is risen in there, and the flavor. And those fresh herbs really just kind of change the nature of it and take it away from just being canned sauce and into something a little fresher and light and beautiful. So with this, if we were ready to go with it, I would take that hot sauce, probably bring it back up to a simmer, throw my pasta in, give it a quick toss, maybe hit it with a little bit of Parmesan on top, if you're into that kind of thing. If not, you can throw some more fresh herbs on there, serve it with some crusty bread off on the side. And this sort of base will give you the opportunity to kind of do all sorts of fun stuff with it. If you've got, like my first thought was kind of a Castelvetranos olives or, even like some Spanish olives, like nothing with a really vinegary brine, but something just, a little bit more olivey. I guess would go through and like plays really nicely with that, gives it a little bit of a extra texture. And it'll give it something else, kind of exciting within there. Just a nice, beautiful, light and easy kind of sauce that if you're focused on it and paying attention to it, in its own, like you can kind of go from 0 to done in about 20 minutes, and not necessarily need access to a whole lot of fresh stuff outside of those herbs to be able to kind of give it that lift. Okay, let's see here. So that's rocking. Bolo's going. Oops. Let us do a round. Well, I guess, which do we want? Do we want to try and like knock out a quick batch of shrimp, or do we want to try and push on to pesto?
I'm gonna guess shrimp because I know there were some people waiting.
That's right, dinner time. Okay, so we're gonna do some shrimp.
Now, do you store your first thing in the glass of water? And if so, do you keep it on the counter or in the fridge?
So this is a new thing I'm trying. My issue has been that like my refrigerator is a little too cold, and so my herbs deflate really fast. So I'm trying it. It says the internet says to keep it in the glass of water in the refrigerator to kind of keep it a little bit fresher longer. One thing I would think though is what I found out with the basil and the thyme, or pardon me, the oregano and the thyme earlier, is that be careful like where your refrigerator's fan output is, because that's going to be the coldest, and getting that cold direct air right on top of them is going to kind of cause them some issues. So find a warmer kind of spot in your fridge, in theory somewhere, kind of in the middle-ish range. But I'm trying out the water thing to see if it works. I mean, when I bought these, they were a little less, happy. But I brought it home and put it in that cold water and put it in the fridge, and it actually perked up really nicely. So I think it'll be the way moving forward, but just trying to narrow that one down. Okay, so definitely shrimp. All right. So with the shrimp, there's a lot of different types of shrimp. Things to think about with shrimp. You can get them in frozen. You can get them raw, you can get them cooked. I tend to buy, ones that are, right now at least, buying them from Costco, and it's it was frozen before, but then they thawed it, and it's peeled. It's not peeled, pardon me. It's just split and ready to be peeled, but it's it's already been deveined. There we go. That's where I was looking for. So with this, I like it because it's nice and easy. I don't have to worry about thawing it out, but it does require me to use them or figure out something to do with all of it all at the same time. Now with your basic shrimp, if you're not familiar with the deveining process, there's a vein that runs down the back of the shrimp, basically where it does its business. It's kind of the last part of its digestive tract. So what you want to do with them is, if they don't already come deveined, you're going to want to take your shrimp, and if it's shelled and not deveined, you kind of take the bottom this sort of bottom collar piece and wiggle it back and forth, and there's a little pop to make it like lighter or to separate. And then you can take your finger and sort of grab the shell and start to kind of roll it up off the shrimp. I always roll toward the legs, for me, just because it makes life easier. This one in particular, they'd already split it there, so it makes it make more sense. But even if it's a whole shrimp, I always kind of peel toward the legs, because I don't want all the legs kind of flowing around. I want it to kind of get wrapped up really nice with what I'm trying to do here. And then also, I always feel like I can get better traction on the other side if I've got the legs piece in the middle as I start to pull it away. And in a normal shrimp, an undeveined shrimp, then I would go through and I kind of take this tail piece, and I'm gently holding it on the sides here. I've got my finger and thumb sort of pinching this bottom tail piece, and I'm just gonna wiggle it a little bit until that collar piece pops off of my little shrimp tail. If they weren't deveined, I would then take my knife and kind of gently run it down the spine of the shrimp to be able to kind of open up that track. I mean, you can kind of see there's that actual canyon there. That's not the knife cut. That's the actual body of the shrimp, and that's where that intestinal tract will run. And you would, if it wasn't deveined, you would see, kind of the intestine right there, and that'll be filled with grit and dirt and the other things that the shrimp eat. So just take that, and once you've got it kind of prepped up to this point where you have that devein or that vein there, you would take that part out, run it under a little cold water just to get it rinsed off and get rid of it. So that way you're not having to worry about it. For these ones, it makes my life a little easier to go through and kind of do these ones from Costco, because I can just kind of bang through them pretty fast. If they're already sort of deveined, I just don't have to worry about that separation piece. I just use my fingers to start to kind of come along that back part. Same thing though, kind of just gently pulling the meat away from the tail piece, and then kind of set them aside. So I'm gonna rip through this pretty fast, hopefully. You don't have to throw away the shells. I'm going to today, just because I don't really have a use for them. But you can use this if you want to make a shrimp stock. You can take them and throw them in the freezer, save them for later. We did shrimp butter. So I took the shells and like 2 pounds worth of butter and just sort of like slow cooked it, and then strained the shrimp shells out of there.
When I brought the shrimp home from the butcher, should I wash them?
Yes. I would go through, and if you were going to devein them, you're going to wash them anyway. I wouldn't wash them before you got them to the point where you were about to eat them. So peel, deveined, or split, and then you would kind of like rinse them all off and make sure that they didn't have any sort of residual poop on them or anything like that. So, one of the beauties and sort of pain points of cooking for people, especially when we start getting into some of these like specialty, imagining like one person's going to eat 5 or 6 shrimp. So if you got a dinner party for 4, you have to do at least 20 of these, if not more. Kind of concepts is that if it's something that's not stressing you out, this is a nice sort of like just depending on the size. This will kind of give you that Zen moment, something you can kind of just focus off into the middle distance, start thinking about your next novel, what you're gonna buy, next color socks you're going to wear for tomorrow, whatever it is you want to think about. But unfortunately, if you are under the gun or if this is a stressful moment, it does feel like it takes forever to kind of get to that point where you can get it rolling through. So, there's a lot of, I think, we kind of talked about it a little bit before, there's a lot of ways to go through and kind of take cooking up to, dial it up to 11, right? Where it's like all super fresh, all super local. Everything is lovingly handcrafted by somebody else, going through and doing the thing, and every meal can be a 4-hour masterpiece. But I like to try and find some way to sort of bridge the gap on that and be able to, get back to, the other things a little bit sooner, and, kind of getting in those great ingredients. And sometimes, getting in some of those convenience ingredients to help be able to get me to, whatever's important at the time. Shrimp sizing, if you've ever looked at sort of the packaging runs that they do, shrimp are measured in U's. I think it probably stands for unit. I don't know. But like these ones are what are they, like U20s? Probably like U16s. So what the U refers to is approximately how many shrimp per pound. So as you get bigger, you'll have fewer shrimp per pound because they're getting bigger. And there's 16 ounces in a pound. So each one of these in theory is right around an ounce, maybe a little less. And then of course, as you go down a little further, you start getting into sort of ranges, which like 3140s or 25 or 22, 26, something like that. There's a lot of sort of industry standard numbers that you can go through and take a look at. You start getting into like 5160s. Those would tend to be a little bit more like popcorn shrimp, cocktail shrimp, kind of size. But just so you know what you're looking for, it is a seafood industry standard, but knowing what I know about shrimping industries and seafood industries as a whole on kind of the back end, not a bad idea to go into it with eyes wide open and kind of question what you're getting and where they're getting it from, if that kind of thing interests you, because it does get to be a little murky sometimes, where these things are coming from and who's making them and what kind of country. So depending on how deep you want to dig on that, there's definitely an iceberg floating under those waters. All right, so that should be more than enough for us to get going through with for today. But to that point, even though these ones did say that they were deveined, I'm gonna give them a quick flush out just to be on the safe side. There's nothing worse than a little shrimp poop in dinner. Okay. I get that bolo going, so we're just gonna give it a little stir real quick before we get wrapped up on this other task. Doesn't really need a whole lot of attention at the moment, but every now and again, I just want to make sure, giving it that other swap through, get these things smooshed down. Okay. Now with the shrimp, I'm gonna get a pan going. For this, I am going to use my non-stick. I'm going to come at it a little bit more aggressive than before. So I'm going to go a 6 out of 10 as I start getting warmed up. But that also means I got to get this flying through. So with this one on the garlic, instead of having it minced, I want to do a slice. I think the slice looks really nice. I've got a couple of, I can pick my garlic cloves basically from having pre-bought them. So I've got some of these like big fat boys here that are going to look really pretty once they sort of fry up. Yep. And I don't need, like, imagine, you know, however many people you're going through and want to feed. I'm gonna do about 2 cloves of garlic per person of worth of shrimp that I'm trying to cook. So for Aaron and I, we're gonna look at 4 cloves. Adjust accordingly. I mean, the garlic in here is gonna be robust. So, you know, trying to make sure that you don't blow everybody at the dinner table out of the water. Slice as thin as you want. Yeah, don't worry if it's not 100%. We're just trying to get that garlic flavor in there. And I think the big slices add for a little more drama. We're gonna grab a little knob of butter. Apologize, every now and again I get British for some reason. And I think the conversion for that, a knob of butter is about a tablespoon, give or take, since they don't really care what tablespoons are over there. But gives us a good kind of idea where we want to be with it. So I'm gonna take that clump of butter there, throw that in that pan. Now, like I said, I'm trying to move a little fast because I want to try and catch this garlic butter right whenever it starts to foam up and starts to get to, you know, on the clarified stage. So we got our garlic, got our butter rocking. For the spicy piece, you have a couple of different options. And you have any option you want really on what you want to do as far as your chilies go. So if you're crazy and have all sorts of different types of chilies and or chili flakes, by all means, do whichever one makes you feel excited. There's all different types. We can wax on about it all day. You know, there's the sort of base red chili flake that you see in a lot of the, so I guess I don't have any of that. But yeah, you know the spice containers I'm talking about. Yeah, of red flake that you probably got floating around in your pantry somewhere, or you know somebody who does. You know, that have like a very base sort of robust heat to them. There's, you know, Aleppo flakes, which have gotten a lot more popular these days, a lot more mild, a little bit more floral, still pack a little bit of heat. There's these Urfa chilies I've been seeing around a lot more. These ones are black, similar to the Aleppo, where it's kind of comes out of that same region. It's a little bit more oily, has this like really rich, robusty sort of earthiness to it and the smell. But again, a little bit more floral than heat. If you like, you know, scorpion peppers and you know, jalapenos, even like anything you would want to go through and kind of heat this bad boy up, flavor profile. We're gonna have the richness of the butter. We're gonna have the pungency of the garlic. We're gonna have the heat of the chili, the richness and sweetness of the shrimp. So finding that sort of balance to it really helps to get everything all together. So my butter's melted. You can kind of see it's starting to foam up real nice like. And it's foaming here in this puddle corner. This is a better one. Foaming up here in the corner. It's not quite where I want it to be yet because it's still white and bubbly. It's going to hit this moment, which I'm not sure I'm going to be able to catch, where all that sort of white foaminess on the top sort of breaks. And it's kind of what we're doing is we're evaporating out the water that's in the butter as they made the process, and kind of getting it to just having that nice, beautiful rendered sort of richness of butter left to it, and getting those milk solids sort of solidified. And that's what all this like white foaming piece is. So I stirred around a little bit. Now I can see like it's kind of hit that moment where I've got a lot less white foam, and now I can just see that beautiful sort of pooling, you know, milk fat, butter fats in there. So now we have that. I'm gonna add my garlic. Got a little light sizzle right off the bat. We're gonna add a touch of our chili.
You always start with butter, not olive oil?
When I'm trying to make this, because it was scampi, I start with butter, but you can easily use olive oil if you wanted to try and keep it dairy-free. Add my chilies to it, and there's a little sizzle on the color change with the chilies. I'm getting that beautiful aromatic of those chilies, what I'm shooting for. Garlic is sort of simmering nicely, and I'm gonna take my shrimp and I'm gonna put them in there real gentle. 4, 5. So I need 2 more. So that way her and I both get 5. Okay. So now I've got my shrimp in there. My hands are quick with. And this is probably going to take a little bit of practice. Go through and do, but you either have a fork or a spatula, and we're going to be able to position ourselves in a moment to be able to flip these shrimp at some point. I got my sizzle going. I hear it. It's not out of control. It's not wild. It's not popping. It's not screaming hot, but it's definitely cooking those shrimp. I can see pinking around the bottom where the shrimp are kind of getting contact with the oil or the butter and that garlic. Keeping an eye on that garlic, just trying to make sure it doesn't get too crispy. I'm putting my finger right on the top of the uncooked part of the shrimp, which is why it's not hot. By all means, be as safe as you need to be. I am a maniac. I apologize. I teach people bad behaviors. You can use a fork. Yeah, be careful with those nonstick pans. You don't want to go through and scratch that, whatever you kind of use in your pans to move it around. But once they get to a nice sort of red color, you get a little sizzle to them. I want to try and flip them. So you can kind of see, I've got that one, it's got this nice sort of red color to it. The chili's kind of peppered into there really nicely. So I'm gonna go through and take and flip over my other ones. It's starting to get firm as well as it cooks on that one side. So it makes it a little easier, in my opinion, to go through and flip it. You can use the side of the pan if you need to. So you kind of grab this one here, sort of bring it to the edge and press it against it, and that natural sort of slope of the saute pan helps me to get that shrimp flipped without too much fuss or muss. And then as usual, I'm kind of using my offhand to do a little swirling motion here. I'm not trying to go crazy. I'm not trying to flip them. I'm just trying to make sure that everything's sort of in motion. Not really for any nonstick purposes, but I want that butter to sort of lap up a little bit on the pieces of shrimp that aren't cooked. Right now we're at a 6, but it's about timing with this. So we put it on a 6, we gave it about a minute, added the butter, let it melt. As soon as the butter hit our sweet spot, then we started working in this. So we probably haven't hit a full 6 yet. And butter, garlic, chili, and shrimp, salt and pepper. Now I'm adding a little salt and a little pepper. Yeah, I waited on the salt and pepper because I want that chili and the garlic to be sort of the primary force in the shrimp. Not that the salt is going to really get in the way, but just trying to give it, that pop at the end. I want the chili to be the underlying and the pepper to be a little fresher on that flavor profile. All right, so with the shrimp, I'm kind of just sort of feeling them out. When I stick it with my fork, it's sort of tight all the way through. As you can see, I've got a nice opacity all the way across. It's still bright and white. The curl of the shrimp isn't too excessive. Let's see here if we can find a good one. So like with some of these shrimp, you'll see that there are tighter curls than others, but none of them are curled so tight onto themselves that they're going to they're kind of flip over a little bit. And that's one of those signs of kind of overcooking with shrimp, is if the shrimp kind of goes from, being sort of a tight curl into, kind of really super tight, it tends to be a little on the dry side and overdone. So that was shrimp. Really fast, kind of having your ducks in a row and knowing what you're shooting for helps a lot. It's in the setup, and then it's that last minute finish. A little warm. For this one, with that early, it's a slow building heat. There's a little bit, for me, there's a little bit of a aromatic fruitiness to it, and then it starts to kind of settle in with that garlic and butter.
How long to cook shrimp before flipping, and then total cooking time?
Probably a minute and a half to 2 minutes on the first side, flip it for about another minute to 2 minutes, and then you should be done. If it's not like if you get a little bit of sizzle, everything's cooking from the moment you put those shrimp in there. Really, you don't want to go too far with it, just because there's no way really to walk it back. But it's going to depend a little bit on, your pan, how much butter you have in there, and then also the thickness of the shrimp. 5160s are going to cook a little faster than some of these 16s or the 12s. So kind of get it adjusted from there. I don't really have a full plated piece to it because kind of getting myself distracted here. But in the end, with this kind of idea, I would have taken my my noodles. Yeah, and this would have been a 2-pot meal, right? Where I'd have made my pasta, put that aside. I'd have had my pot still with the pomodoro, and I would have made that. And then I would start the pan with the shrimp. And then, once the pomodoro was at that herb stage. And then as I put in the shrimp, I'd turn the pomodoro back on to get back up to the simmer, throw in my pasta with either thrown it into the pot with the pomodoro if I had my balance right, like if it was the only meal that we were doing. If not, I'd put my pasta, kind of like toss through on that hot sauce, put some of the sauce on there, flick a couple of shrimp onto it, and then kind of call it as it goes. You can also, with this kind of dish, even build it around the pasta. Like if we'd have thrown in a little bit more butter, we can have thrown the noodles right in with the shrimp. Maybe add a little bit of vegetable stock, a splash of wine to kind of give it some moisture. And then that would have been the dish itself as well. Once you've got that cool pasta ready to go, you can pretty much do anything you want with it. Okay, let's see here. What else we got? So we can finish off the shrimp piece. The marinade piece that I was talking about before, really basic. For us, we use balsamic vinegar, one of those fabulous things they sell at Costco in bulk. What do I do with that jar? There is one thing that I've done that you might not have at home. It's reduced balsamic. And what I do with it is I basically take a bottle, probably about this size, about the size of the oil here. So you take one of these, 1 liter bottles, and then I reduce it down to about one of these, like a 500 liter bottle. And the intent is to increase the viscosity and the sweetness of the vinegar and take out some of the astringency to it. So as much as I can kind of show you here, you can see that it's not chocolate syrup thick, but it is definitely thicker than it would be if I just straight bought it. And the intent, again, is to go through and kind of highlight that sweetness in the balsamic, kind of pulls out this, like warm stone fruit kind of flavor profile, grapes, prunes, things like that, without all that like really harsh sort of acidity that you can get sometimes off of vinegar. We've actually poured this on vanilla ice cream, to go through and like kind of provide a really great contrast and a nice item. And then I like having it as reduced because then I can get a little bit more bang for my without having to have it, sort of constantly, smothered in something that's going to be acidic, especially when I marinate shrimp. I don't want too much acid in there because it starts to get not quite a ceviche because the acidity is not high enough, but it does start to do something to the outside texture of the shrimp. So taking some of that acidity out. Put it in a pot, put it on low, and then open up all of your windows. It's going to be really pungent when it goes off, but it's just any type of sort of high-walled sauce pot that'll fit the amount that you bought, and then put it on nice and low. We're not trying to reduce it down to like it shouldn't seem syrupy when you reduce it, but you want to try and get that volume down, about a quarter or so. If you're feeling really brave and brazen about it, you can go down as far as half. It does get really thick, so you have to think about what kind of bottle you put it in afterwards. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to get back to it or get it out of there again. But kind of slow and low, but you're basically burning off that acid and the vinegariness of it. So it's going to make the house smell like vinegar for about a day or two. So vent the windows. If you have an opportunity to cook it outside, you can do that to get yourself going where you want to be. Okay. So with these marinated shrimp, basically I just start with the peeled shrimp, a gallon-sized bag, and then we're gonna go through, throw in a couple of those. 4, 6, 7, 9, 10. Did I actually like count it out right without doing it? Almost. That was one shrimp off. Okay, so I have to one more in this marinade. Okay, so I got my shrimp there. With this, we're gonna go through and take a little bit of that balsamic vinegar. For this, with the reduced vinegar, I'm probably putting in about, I don't know, 3 tablespoons, give or take. I want to make sure that everything gets a little bit of surface contact with it. If I was using just a regular vinegar, I'd probably do about the same amount. We're not going to get the same flavor profile out of it, even if we add more. We're just adding more acid to it. So we just want to try and keep enough in there to get the flavor punch to it. We're going to do about 1.5 tablespoons or so's worth of oil, just to keep it lubricated. For this one, I am going to do cracked black pepper. I'm going to let it sit here for a little while, and so that pepper will have a chance to sort of do whatever it needs to, kind of take that rough edge off of it. And then with the salt, I'm actually going to be a little lighter than I would be normally, because what's going to happen is when I want it to sit here in that salt, I don't want it to be so salty that it starts to cure or start to get a little tough. It is already going to go through and start to pull out some of the moisture from the shrimp just by osmosis, sort of changing the salinity on the inside versus the outside. But we don't want it to start kind of pre-cooking it in the bag. I'm going to add a little bit of garlic. Normally I have roasted garlic, but I haven't taken time to make that yet today. So I would normally put like 2 or 3 roasted cloves of garlic in here and mush them. But we don't have that, so I'm just going to go through and throw in some of that fresh garlic. 1 clove against that sort of 2-person portion. Throw that there in the bag. And then that's pretty much it. Like, I don't really go too wild with it. You don't have to use balsamic if you like red wine vinegar, if you like raspberry vinegar, if you're like me and as a sucker for all those like flavored oils and vinegar, sort of peddlers that are at wine festivals or whatever else, and you've got like a weird random collection of all sorts of stuff, like get after it, man. Like try a little bit of it, see, what you think of the flavor profile, knowing that, whatever you do with it next is going to kind of heavily impact that flavor. If you sear it, it's going to help reduce down these vinegars and make it a little bit more sweet. So you want to try and stay away from anything that's going to get, too wild or concentrated. I think like herb infused things tend to not do as well with a second heat. But like sweet and spicy tends to do pretty well. If you're going to grill it, then you've got that sort of, you've got the smoke notes and the char notes of what you got going on with your grill, that need to go through and play in there as well. So think about how you want to deal with it and what you want to do with it, and then kind of adjust there if need be. But this is kind of a nice sort of basic piece that gets me where I want to go most times. I wouldn't let it sit for more than 2 days or so in the fridge in the marination, just because, again, we're doing something chemically to the shrimp. So we don't want to let it sit there for too long and have it come out with a weird texture. If you're in a hurry and like you forgot to go through and kind of set it up the day before, or you just want to like kind of roll in from go from lunch into a sort of setting up for a dinner, you can leave it on the counter at room temperature. I strongly suggest that you go through and make sure that you do not leave it room temperature without cooking it for longer than 2.5 hours. Just because, with potential bacteria growth and any of the rest of those things, like it doesn't need to be icy cold. That actually kind of hurts some pieces of cooking to it. But you definitely don't want it to be like 6 days or 6 hours out room temperature, just kind of chilling, waiting for you to cook it, you just run some risks there that are better off left alone. I use that same kind of marinade for pretty much anything I'm going to throw on the grill. Fresh vegetables, we do mushrooms in there as well. They really soak it up really nice and get that good char and bring out that nice flavor.
So how do you defrost shrimp? Do you just leave it in the fridge overnight?
Yes, if you can.
Say that loud.
I did say it out loud. Did I say it out loud?
They can't hear me.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. So defrosting shrimp. I got it now. So with defrosting shrimp, I would suggest that you go through and try and thaw it out overnight in the refrigerator if you can. That's going to probably give you the best, sort of flavor retention and texture retention. But if you're under the gun, you can go through, especially with like those Costco ones. I mean, they come in IQF, which is individually quick frozen. So they're really easy to separate. Usually you can just kind of put them in a container, throw it over water, and go, get it going on a little. I take it and fill it up with one of those containers of water, and then I'll let it fill up, let it sit for 5 minutes, and then pour it off. And then I'll refill it again, because what I'm trying to do is get the glaze off of it. And that usually thaws it out pretty fast, and I can go from frozen solid to thawed out in about 20 minutes. But refrigerated overnight is going to be your best bet if you can. So for the other piece of shrimp, I mean, I don't know if you need to roll through it. The idea is the same as the marinade. The only things that I would swap out is that as opposed to using a vinegar, I'm going to end up using, a tamari or a soy sauce.
I'm not doing it now.
To be able to go through and
You don't need these mods. They're for very older people.
give it a little bit more of that Asian flavor profile. I'm going to go through and add like sriracha to it. If you're very familiar with Asian flavors, there's tons of ingredients that kind of fit and make it make sense. Mirin is your like sweetening agent, like sweet cooking wine. Fish sauce, I mentioned it before, really might seem counterintuitive to add shrimp sauce to something that's already sort of seafoody. But what we're trying to do is, again, just really cranking up the flavor of that dish and that item in there, and really kind of bringing it home. I mean, it's a similar idea to like Worcestershire sauce, something really robust, really pungent, that, on its own might be really weird, but adding it to something really gives it definition. It makes the symphony sing, so to speak. All right, pesto. So with the pesto, we're going to do this into a container because we're going to use a little immersion blender to blend it up. If you don't have an immersion blender, it's going to be very coarse. I'm not sure how that would emulsify, but you can use a regular stand-up blender if you have one. I like these stick blenders. They're really inexpensive overall these days. You can get a really good one, for 25, 30 bucks. And it's, basically, you've got your blade on the bottom here, you got your long handle, you've got your, your on-off button, and then you just kind of put it in whatever you want to be able to go through and use. For this, set that aside there. I grab our basil. So with this, I buy basil at Smart and Final. They go through and have sort of a 3-pound box that I can get for 10 bucks. Depending on how much you like basil, how much you like pesto, kind of get whatever makes sense to you. If you can find somebody who grows it nearby, always works out nice as well. But these ones, I find that they give me like really nice, big, beautiful leaves. They're a little wilty because they've been sitting out here at room temperature for an hour or two now. But they come in nice and fresh. They've got really great flavor. And I'm just going to go through and kind of strip those leaves off of here. Pretty much just gathering the leaf and not the stem, and throwing it in my container here. We're going to puree this up, so the volume on here is going to decrease incredibly. It's going to be a little funky to get started because there's going to be a lot of air pockets, and we're going to need to be able to get some kind of liquid down to the bottom of it to be able to get it to spin. So I'm going to start with the basil first, knowing that as I add the other things, the oil, the garlic, and the nuts to it, it's going to, kind of help weigh that down and give me something for those blender teeth to grab onto once we get down there. With this, I mentioned, you can use Parmesan if you're trying to go through and do the vegan thing. You can use white miso or any kind of miso, I think, really, to kind of give it that that saltiness. If you're vegan and you haven't become familiar with white miso yet, or misos of any kind, I strongly suggest you dig into it. It's a really great, sort of like a Parmesan-y flavor sort of substitute. Gives it a really solid, gives dishes a really solid sort of round umami flavor, helps them to stand out a little bit. One of the biggest things I find is an issue with vegan cheeses is the sort of lack of, it's gonna sound weird, I'm kind of sending when I say it, but kind of a lack of character when it comes to flavor in comparison to cheese. And it's the culturing of milk to turn it into cheese that I think gives it its sort of great richness, and one of the things that I really like about it. Like even a cheddar cheese, one of the sort of more plain Jane, or can be, sort of plain Jane homogenous style cheeses in America. One cheddar cheese to another, if you take the time and sort of try them side by side, like there's a difference to it. There's a backbone in there that kind of varies depending on who made it, how long they cultured it for, what strain they used to get to it, that adds, some element of spiciness or of earthiness to it, that's just hard to reproduce, I think, for some of these vegan cheesemakers, because there's nothing in vegan cheese that really reacts the same way as milk does whenever it's introduced to some of those bacterias. So it's hard to get there, but I think miso helps to kind of jump that gap. So I've got my thing here full of basil. I threw in 2, 4, 5 garlic cloves. I'm going to take my oil and I'm going to give it about 3, 4 tablespoons. Good couple of glugs on there. And then for our pesto, I'm going to use cashews, roasted and salted. So knowing that they're salted, and just make sure that I pay attention to how much Parmesan I add or how much seasoning I need to it. If you use unsalted, you're going to need more seasoning on your own. You can use pine nuts, which is a traditional piece. You can do raw or toasted. I think for me, toasted works out a little bit better, just because it helps to kind of stand up a little bit. We use Marcona almonds. I've used walnuts. Pistachios end up being, I think, a little soft in my opinion, and a little weirdly rich. So I'm not a big fan of those. But some of the rest of these, that's what we're trying to do, is that the nut in here is going to help add the richness to it, because otherwise we've just got a big herb, balanced out against this garlic piece. So I've taken and added probably 4 ounces cashews, about half of this container here, to get it going. I'm gonna throw a splash of water in here. So that way I can try and get some kind of liquid starting to build up on the bottom. So as you can maybe see here, there's a little bit of that water and the oil kind of down here on the bottom of my container. And what I'm going to try and do with this is I'm going to grab my immersion blender, and then I'm going to go through and kind of start to try and smash and work it down while it's running, to get down to liquid, to get enough liquid going that it's going to grab everything else and start to blend it basically from the bottom up. I might not get all the way there, so I might have to add some more water to it, but we're going to start it off and see how we do. Nope, still angry with me. Okay, so what I'm gonna do, oh yeah, got all the nuts and everything kind of pounded up in there. So knock some of this extra nut out of there real fast. We're gonna add a little bit more water. And see if we can't get where we need to go. All right. So what I've come to the realization of is that all those cashews have turned into cashew butter in the bottom of this pan and causing me problems. Okay, so one thing to note, I'm gonna clean out the bottom of this a little bit, but making sure that there's no way it will accidentally turn on and I would zip myself and or then end up having to go to the hospital for stitches. Had this happen all the time, culinary school, teaching the basics class. This is basically, we taught them how to make pesto. And every time I gave a 10-minute lecture on the fact that every time you clean it, make sure it is unplugged. Make sure there's no way whatsoever that this thing will turn on while your finger's in it, because otherwise it will. And invariably, somebody ended up having to go to the emergency room and needing to get stitches of some sort. I think the worst one, the kid had gone through and had 33 stitches against 3 fingers. So no, it's no joke. Take it serious. All right. Come on, baby. See, and this is it. Like, ball's waiting on me. She's all expectant, and here I am messing it all up. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add a little bit of oil. So I think I've just got my ratio off. I got too much nut in there and not enough sort of fluids. So now is where like that sort of cooking is alchemy thing kind of comes in. Now we're gonna add a little of this, add a little of that until I can get it to do what I want it to do. So we added some more water to it. I wanna add a little bit more oil. I'm trying to make sure that we get to that, to those greens and get enough sort of movement in here that we can go through and adjust. I think we're getting there. All right, and what I'm doing with this is I'm kind of rolling it around to get some of that stuff on the outside edge of the blender here. And then just making sure that I grab those big pieces of leaves. And then when I'm going in, I'm just kind of trying to wiggle it a little bit to get it to work its way down to the bottom.
When I do it in the blender and drizzle oil in, maybe mine ends up too oily.
Well, if it ends up with a little too much oil in it, you can always add a little bit of water. If you happen to have any orange or lemon, or even like, you know, bottle juice in the fridge, you can add that as well. The citrus will play really nice with this and kind of help lift it up. And that'll help stretch it out so that way it doesn't seem so oily. Oh, there we go. All right. So now we've got it worked out, or most of this is ground out. And a couple pockets of basil floating in there. Oh, all right. Took a little while, but I think it's going to be worth it. Okay. All right, so with this pesto, it's nice and thick, sticks to that blender, piece really nicely. Has a good grip to it. At this point, though, we still need to go through and kind of find that balance. With this raw garlic in here, there should be a little bit of heat there, but mostly I've got that flavor of cashew, that fresh basil. Now we're going to season it. So we're going to hit it with a little bit of salt and a little bit of black pepper in there. And then for us, I am going to go ahead and add Parmesan. I use a mixture of Parmesan depending on the moment. Parmigiano Reggiano, really great, it's beautiful, it's aged 24 months. You can buy it in wedges at the grocery store, all over the place these days. If you like to get it fresh and have it there, great flexibility on being able to like shave it for crackers, be able to fresh grate it if you'd like to. For those kind of things, if you have like a microplane or a grater or something that you love, it's a really beautiful touch. Gives you this nice like light snowy. You can get this really nice, beautiful, light snowy kind of shaving over pasta. And I haven't used like Kraft grated Parmesan in a long time, but I know that that's out there as well. And if that's what you have, by all means, like roll with it. I think we're kind of looking at two ends of the spectrum. There's the a step above sort of like processed cheese product, and then like the grand Cadillac of Italian cheese. So there's a lot of wiggle room in the middle there to find what it is that you like and what makes you happy. Okay. So I got that Parmesan added. I'm gonna go through, blend it in. You can make your pesto a little thinner if you like. This one ended up on the thick side, which is nice. Help like cling. How much what? Parmesan cheese? I think I put in about 2 tablespoons worth of shredded. I'm gonna try and taste it and see, kind of where that puts me, if I need to add a little bit more or not. But I'm trying to like balance out, some of the salt against what I put in there versus what I know the cheese is going to give me. So I don't want it to go too crazy. But the Parmesan is going to have its own sort of flavor profile in there. So if you've added it and you can't taste it, add some more, because you want to be able to make sure that everything that's in there was in there for a purpose. Sometimes it's to stand politely in the background. Sometimes it's meant to be the lead singer in the front. But finding that harmony is really important if you're going to add things to a dish. Right. Yeah, if it's too salty, then don't add too much cheese to it. You can always sprinkle a little bit more on the top of your dish, because if once you add it to the pasta and the rest of it, you're kind of playing with the salinity again. So you might have some room in there to add some more salt back to it. Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Okay, so that's pesto. Depending on how thick you ended up with it, you can just throw it right on top of oiled pasta. A little bit of butter. You can throw this in with a little bit of, if you have it half and half or heavy cream, and just make a nice light pesto cream sauce with it. You can go through and I've seen people take them in, like they've got little silicone ice cube trays, kind of freezing it. And then once it's frozen, you can pop it out in little cubes, and then you have like little pesto cubes to throw into things. You can use your pesto in your Pomodoro or add it to your bolognese to give, like some more of that sort of fresh herbiness to those dishes as well. So really versatile in being able to kind of jump back and forth into different things. All right. Bolo's simmering nicely. Every now and again, I kind of come back through. When I stir it, I'm making sure that I stir all the way around the side because it tends to build up a little bit there. You can kind of see now, hopefully, that I can kind of surf the top. And it's thick enough that it's kind of holding those ridges. Just kind of giving me an idea of like what its viscosity is, if it's kind of hit the point that I want it to. But you can see like no real bubbles even on the simmering, just a nice sort of gentle roll of steam coming off the top of that as I just sort of gently kind of let all that moisture come out and concentrate those flavors really well. Okay, last but not least, I'm gonna do a quick light Alfredo sauce. So I got my pot, it's got a little bit of a lip to it to be able to go through and give me a chance to add some liquid here and let it reduce. The cream or half and half or any dairy that I put in here is gonna bubble up a lot. So I wanna try and make sure that I've got some room for that to happen without worrying about it kind of cascading over into the pan around the stove as fast as possible. Oh, that's right. I'm gonna start off with another round of butter in this one. We're gonna turn it on. We're gonna go probably 4 out of 5. And we'll go 5 out of 10, sorry. So we'll go 5 out of 10 on this one on the heat for right now. Clean off this knife. Go. Work my way towards a knob of butter. In this instance, it's going to be 2 knobs, so about 2 tablespoons worth of butter right there in the pot. Hold off on that for a second and grab that garlic. So process this one more time, real fast, just getting it ready, giving it that little bit of time to make it as healthy as it's going to be when I smother it in cream and butter. That was loud. Sorry about that. All right, I'll let that sit. Phone's dying. I don't know if it picked up. Can you hear me on this one? Am I there now? Okay. There we go. Technical difficulties, my apologies. Okay, there we go. Look at that, back in action, bam. Okay, yeah, sure sign that I talked too long because my earbud died. Okay, so anyway, got the butter going in here. We want to add the garlic a little earlier because I want to get a nice sort of slow simmer on this one. So just enough butter melted on the bottom here to give a good coating before I throw in this garlic. Set that aside. And then just kind of get that garlic coated in that butter just a little bit. Make sure I'm not sticking up on the edges. And then as it comes up to temperature, it's gonna already start cooking out that garlic a little bit, which would be nice. I'm gonna go ahead and add my pepper now, but I'm gonna wait on my salt because we have that Parmesan coming at it. So we don't wanna go too buck wild just yet. But again, I wanna let that garlic get a little chance to start its party along with that pepper here, and make sure that nobody's gonna be too loud when we add all the rest of the delicacies to it. So to try and make this a touch lighter, a couple different routes you can go. My original Alfredo was basically you just take heavy cream and reduce it and add cheese. um, which definitely ends up being really rich, really thick. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of adjust. And I'm going to do a touch of half and half as my sort of reducing agent. And then we're going to keep some vegetable stock here on the side, just in case we need to thin it down a little bit. But the same basic principle is going to be there, is that I want to add this dairy in there and I want to let it kind of come up to heat and reduce down a little bit. And that's what's going to give us a little bit of our thickness on this particular sauce. So that garlic is coming along nicely. Getting that beautiful smell. It's bubbling well. You see the bubbles? Probably see the bubbles. Yeah, so it's bubbling well, but nothing's really getting too dark. It's not aggressive. There's a sort of a light sizzle to it, but nothing super loud like we've had in the other pans as we've gotten ourselves started. Just as I start to see a little bit, or right before I see a little bit of browning in that garlic, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna add the half and half. If you have heavy cream, if you're looking for it to be a little bit more rich, by all means, hit it. If you want to try and do a little lighter, you can do it with milk. Just know that it's going to be a little harder to get like a really thick viscous sauce without adding some other sort of emulsifier to it.
How much did you just put in?
What is that? It's probably about a cup. I don't know, it was honestly what was left in the container, but yeah, probably right about a cup. So now that we've added that, I don't have to pay as much attention to it. I just wanted to kind of come up to a simmer. So what we're going to do is we're going to get our herbs ready for this one. So the herbs, in the same basic idea of what we did with the Pomodoro, is going to go through and give us a little bit of lift. I don't need anywhere near as much as I did from before because I'm doing a much smaller batch here for this. But I'm going to grab, sort of one of these couple of these big basil leaves here. And we're going to lay those out as a nice little herb bed for the other herbs. So that way we can roll them and chop them. All right, so we're going to grab some of this oregano. And then this one, we're going to use a thyme in the mix. I find that thyme works really nicely with the cream base. It adds a little bit of extra to it. I'm not as big of a fan of the flavor of thyme, so I'm not going to add a whole lot. But again, if you know it, you like it, by all means, kind of adjust as needed to get where you want to go with it. Just a solid sort of starting point for me. Those thyme leaves, a little bit smaller, a little harder sometimes to get off without those little super thin twig pieces. So kind of just pinching them off as best I can. Usually I'll end up with just like a little sliver of stem that I can pull away, depending on how tender and young the thyme is that you have. As it gets a little older, as most things, it'll get a little bit bigger, a little easier to sort of strip those leaves off of there. But those thin parts that are just so fragile and so delicate that they break as you're trying to strip them off aren't really going to do anything bad to your palate. You probably won't even notice it once it's been sort of warmed up just a little bit. Look back at my cream, can see already starting to bubble up a touch. Trying to get that raise up that we were talking about. Now wipe down the edges. And with this, what I'm looking for is similar, I guess, to what I would be doing if I was doing the reduced balsamic. So I'm just kind of looking for a reduction in volume because as it's hot, I won't necessarily see, well, at least the level that we're going to with this, I'm not going to see a really big change in, thickness of the sauce overall. So, just trying to keep an eye on it in the back of my mind here. If you're, kind of neck deep in something else, or if you need to walk away from the stove, in this kind of stage, I would definitely suggest turn it off. You can always come back to it. Last thing you want to do is spend the rest of your evening kind of cleaning baked cream off of the stove. Never fun. And it makes the house smell bad too. It's just an added insult to the injury there. Okay, so I got those herbs ready. We're gonna throw in some parsley. Alrighty, get this going. Now, what I want to do is try to just sort of see how my volume's doing. Still not quite there yet. So I should be able to finish chopping up these herbs, and then we should be close to being able to add the cheese. All right, so I got my herbs. We're gonna roll it one more time. We did before, just kind of real gentle, trying to keep those little baby leaves in there as much as I can. And then we're gonna come at it with a knife. Come here, there we go. Even if you kind of like fold it over taco style, you know, just something to try and keep those little bits from getting away. For this one, I'm gonna try and do my first pass a little bit finer than I did the last one. By all means, whatever you're comfortable with. In the end, you can just tear your herbs if you wanted to and throw them in there. I don't think I've said it this time around. For any of you who are new to watching me do this, please just remember that I've been doing this for a living for a lot of years. So I've, you know, chopped more things than most, you know, sort of home cooks will ever see in the course of a Friday night service. So you're definitely do not need to try and match my speed, you know, or any of my bad habits across the board with any of these dishes or practices. So this just said, you know, kind of, again, the light, thin, sort of shaggy mess of herbs. I want this one in here just because I think I like the way that it looks against the white with the Alfredo. It's going to play well with the length of the spaghetti in there. So for me, it's just the aesthetic. Again, you can easily just you know, tear them up if you want to, coarse chop, however it is that you go. With this now, with the amount that I have in here, pretty sure you can see that. So as I pulled the spatula through here, you can almost see that sort of after effect line as it takes a second to kind of fill back in. This is going to be about where I want it to be to try and keep it light. But part of that is because of the pan that I'm using and the amount that's in there. So if you got a deep pan or you're doing more than I am, you might not get that same effect. But that's one thing that you can look for depending on what you're doing with it. I'm going to go through and I'm going to turn it off, you know, and kind of let this residual heat here go through and try and melt my Parmesan. So against the cup of half and half we had in there and reduced down, right now we're at about a quarter cup worth of grated Parmesan. I'm gonna let that, I'm gonna kind of swirl it around. Again, I sort of move my pan while I move my whisk, or my spatula, pardon me. And already you can see it gets, now I've got a lot of black space at the bottom of this pan here. That Parmesan just really helped to sort of bring this in, but it's not spackle. Yeah, it might be a hair thicker than I think I want my final product to be. But you know, it coats the, it's coating the spatula, slides off nicely though, you know, and should have a really nice sort of clean garlic and Parmesan flavor to it. So we're going to try it. If I can find that spoon, there we go. And see how we did. Again, you can kind of see sort of that coating in the back of the spoon. Is that a camera anymore? So, you know, kind of the way that it coats the back of the spoon here. All right. So I like this flavor. I like the cheesiness. One thing I don't like it might have been a little hard to see, is that it's kind of over reduced just a touch. So what that's doing is it's causing it to break. And you can see sort of that curdliness across the back of the spoon here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some of the veggie stock. I'm going to turn it back on low heat, about 1.5 out of 10, and then just a light splash of vegetable stock, about 2-3 tablespoons. And what I want that to do is I want that to help kind of create enough space in between the fat molecules and the cheese molecules to help bring this sauce back together a little bit. Now, part of that sort of separating is expected because I don't really have anything in here that's designed to keep it all together. Normally with like a cheese sauce or velouté or something else fancy from French, you would go through and you would add, a roux, so flour and fat in equal parts kind of cooked down. Or you can add a bermain, which is a flour and fat, but not cooked down kind of version to help thicken it up. But that adds a lot of sort of floweriness and sort of flavor stealers from.
If it's still pretty watery, use milk, not cream. Maybe too much. How can I thicken it?
Okay, so does it need more cheese flavor? Because the cheese would probably be the easiest way to keep it in the right flavor if it's still a little too thin. If it does have enough cheese flavor, then we might have to just go through and almost think, I don't know. We could use cornstarch if we had it to be able to go through and kind of create a light slurry, because we don't want to cook this for too much longer because that cheese is just going to keep trying to break. But if you have cornstarch and you wanted to try and thicken it up, you can take about a tablespoon of cornstarch and add it to about 2 tablespoons worth of water or milk and mix it until it's nice and smooth. And you can dribble a little bit into your sauce, but you want to cook it for about another 5 minutes or so once you do that in order to be able to cook out that starchy flavor. All right, so I got ours to where I wanted it. I'm adding in those herbs to be able to give it a little bit of that freshness and life. I got that Parmesan to the level I want. We're gonna add just a hint of salt. Mix it together. And while this is still warm, I'm gonna take some of that pasta. Throw that in there. Just give it a nice toss. And the noodles are going to soak up a little bit. But everything should get all nice and warm. What was that?
Jeez, which monster you guys having for dinner?
We're going to do some of this pesto, or pardon me, alfredo. And those shrimp. Cool. Oh, okay. So, getting messy. All right, so with the pasta, take a little bit of that pasta that you want to put on there. You want to be fancy with it. You can always go through and kind of use a fork, sort of curl it up, build a little mound, right in the middle. In a different world where we've gotten everything kind of adjusted around. Like if we had gone through with this and the shrimp would have been hot, like this would have been a perfect time to kind of grab those shrimp. Sort of take these bad boys, drop them right up on top. Got a little bit of that garlic, some of that butter, those chilies. And so this heat from the shrimp, plus that richness of the pasta and the sauce there, be a very great contrast to be able to go through and kind of create a nice meal. So yeah, plate however you like, rock your way through.
I got it back.
Oh, okay. Yeah, plate however you like. If you want to add more cheese to it, by all means. You want a little bit of like kept a little bit of fresh herbs right on top. You're ready to rock and roll. So I apologize for a late run. I talk a lot. I keep trying to work on that. Maybe we'll try and dial it down a little bit so it's not quite so crazy if people are trying to make dinner, like focus on a dinner instead of a couple things. Save these kind of things for the weekend. But hopefully you had fun. You learned some things and you've got a couple different pieces. Hopefully you picked up dinner along the way, for something between the pasta, the sauces, whether you get your shrimp ready to rock and roll or not. Yeah, that's it. With the bolo, I think, again, just trying to get to that right consistency. I want it to be, again, with this particular pot, I can do that drag through where I can still see the bottom before everything kind of rushes its way in. Make sure to give it a quick taste, see how it settled. It's going to get better the next day, just because that's going to be the nature of it.
Thanks, Chef. This is awesome, and thank you.
No problem. Thank you. So we're gonna add a little more pepper to mine and a little bit of salt. And then I'm gonna start to clean up. This freezes really well. This one I'd probably do more, kind of the day you want to utilize it. Pomodoro is probably good in the fridge for a day or two. Pesto, I would keep in the fridge for about a week. Anything past that, it's probably time to start taking a look at freezing it. And then shrimp, once you've kind of gotten them cleaned, prepped, marinated, ready to go, fridge for probably no more than 2 days if there's anything with a lot of acid. And then, of course, you can always throw them in the freezer and kind of stash them for probably about another month or so, depending on what you got in the marinade. Vacuum sealers help to extend out that time frame a little bit as well. So have fun, have at it, and enjoy your dinner.
Thanks, guys. Any last minute questions?